And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Avril Williams. I'm in charge of marketing with Backyard ADUs. For any of you who get the newsletter or follow us on social media, I'm the person behind all of that. With us, we also have Chris Lee. He's head of our design and development and the man who started it all, you could say. And also we have Tim O'Reilly. He's our small home advisor in Massachusetts. So if any of you do decide to go through with building with us, you'll be working one-on-one with Tim to make that happen. And as Tim mentioned earlier, we are going to have the chat disabled, except I'll be throwing some resources up there throughout our event tonight. And if anyone asks any specific questions, I can put answers to things in the chat. However, all of your questions, you're going to want to hit that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. That way we don't lose any questions throughout the chat amongst the comments. Make sure that all of your questions get answered. So with that, Chris, are you going to start us off?
Tim O'Reilly is actually going to be starting us off tonight.
Yeah, let's get right into it. I'm going to share my screen, and I expect some good questions from the crowd tonight. So use that Q&A. All right, let's go to full screen here. Right. Awesome. So you know who we are. You're here tonight. We're Backyard ADUs. We build ADUs across New England. Yeah, and we've just gotten rolling on the Cape. It's been about 2 years. And this past year, we've seen our first actual on the ground builds of ADUs, and those ADUs were permitted about 2 years ago. So we've learned a lot, and we're really excited to share all that with you tonight. So we're going to cover a lot of ground. We got a good number of slides, but it's all the key details. Whether you've built an ADU, I've seen a couple people on the call tonight who are our current clients who are building ADUs, or whether you're trying to figure out what's possible. These are all the key details that we hope to convey to you tonight. So what are we building? How do you get it done on the Cape permitting wise? Utilities are key, and sort of how to get started if you're thinking about doing that. So that's the ground we have to cover tonight. Let's get right into it. So what is an ADU? What are we building? And what are we not building? We have sort of two examples here. I'm out on the internet. What is a tiny house? What is a small home? It can get pretty confusing. But those of you that are preparing for the hurricane coming up, an ADU will be where you left it after the hurricane. That's a big difference. But really what it comes down to is an ADU is going to comply with building code. It is connected utilities, and it's on a permanent foundation. So unlike a tiny house on wheels that's on a trailer, our ADUs are meeting all requirements of state and national and local building codes.
And to hedge some of the questions that may come up, can you do a tiny house and make it an ADU? And you can do that. You can have a sub 400 square foot ADU, and you can, in some areas, build it to tiny home code. But it doesn't overrule that second point that the tiny home still got to comply with building code. And a big part of that is the foundation and the utilities. I'm not sure. I don't know, Tim, I know there have been some towns in Massachusetts that have adopted tiny home building code, but I'm not sure if any places on the Cape have.
I haven't seen anything on the Cape. I have seen a couple of things in the state legislature, but those have not passed. Mm-hmm. So just like ADUs, things change pretty quickly. So if anyone in the audience tonight has any more info on that, send it to us, and we'll stay in the know.
Yep.
All right. So yeah, this is what we are building. These are Backyard ADUs. This is an example of one we just finished recently in Falmouth, 640 square feet. That was the maximum they could do on this property. And then they also wanted a garage. So we did a one-car garage as well. But this is what it is. It's on a foundation. It's connected. It has its own septic tank connected to the existing septic system. It has its own water line and water meter, and then power from the street.
Yeah, and size-wise, this is kind of right in line with a pretty comfortable one-bedroom home. Not a lot of one-bedroom homes out there, but if you're between 600 and 700 square feet, you can do a pretty good job designing a one-bedroom home that's got space for storage. It's got room for a bed. It could be accessible. To give another reference point, kind of a level above this, if you want to get 2 bedrooms into an ADU, you're going to need to plan for, breakpoint becomes about 740 square feet. So you need another 100 square feet to get that bedroom in there. And a lot of towns do have rules that will accommodate that. And I think, Tim, what was the story behind this one being 640 square feet in Falmouth?
Yeah, I think it was actually technically 639 or 638. But in Falmouth specifically, they want to know the exact measurements of the house, what type of second story it has, if it does, and then there's a proportionality based on the existing house of how big that accessory dwelling unit can be. It's fairly confusing. In the design process of this house, we actually got guidance from a couple different people in town, and that number flip-flopped and changed a couple times. So
I remember that. I think we had 3 different max sizes from 3 different people in Falmouth. But I would say Falmouth, I think, gets an award for being one of the most helpful building departments and one of the most motivated planning boards, but unfortunately has one of the more difficult bylaws to comply with and permitting processes to deal with. So it's kind of the story of, you can have great rules or you can have bad rules, but a really good building department can make up for it. And I think that's what's going on in Falmouth.
Yeah, so the permitting was a hurdle. We'll look at that a bit later, but we were able to get it done. One interesting thing here too, and that you'll see in some of the bylaws in the Cape, is the aesthetics. And does this house meet not only the existing house, but that of the neighborhood and community? So we added in details here, like the cedar accents, along with our clapboard siding, and that traditional New England trim, in order to meet all and appease all parties. So
I think I remember an actual quote from the chair of the planning board at Falmouth on the first of 3 hearings. And we have a 712 roof on this house. The existing roof has a traditional 10/12 gable roof. And the quote from the planning board chair was, "We are not going to hold up an ADU over 3 inches over 12 or something like that." But they basically, being in the nature of Falmouth, being a very good building department, realized that as long as it's close, it's going to go through and it's going to be a good extra housing unit. So there's some flexibility in there if the building department's on the side of ADUs.
awesome. Yeah, so as a lot of you know, the housing crisis on the Cape hits a bit different. There's a lot of nuances and a lot of things going on. The biggest one is, the enormous surges in seasonal housing. So I'm sure hopefully this time of year, the line's a little bit shorter at the checkout in the grocery store. You don't have to wait as long. The fast food or the Dunkin' Donuts line in the morning. There's different numbers out there when you cruise around the internet. So Falmouth claims, a 300% summertime increase. Cape wide, there's numbers out there quoted at 50%, but you can certainly feel it on the roads and in your neighborhoods. So that affects housing and the stock and what's used for rentals and what's available for year-round residents. The population as well is unique. So when we're comparing to the state and to the country, it's a real aging population. So there's unique needs there. Pretty much all the homes that we're designing on the Cape are accessible, not fully ADA, but we're planning for aging in place because these are for older residents who are downsizing and finding the right fit. And comparatively, building all across Mass and Maine as well, this labor pool, it's like an island. Comparing it to projects we've done on islands, they're very similar. So prices are expensive, materials, subs, sort of across the board, and then limited availability. Lead times are longer to get labor there and materials, and we're seeing that as well. Sort of across the board, we're seeing sort of 15 to 20% higher costs, which is incredible. So a big part of that is freight, getting everything down there. But also the electrician is charging more, HVAC is charging more, plumbing is charging more. We're starting to build in Somerville in Boston. So we'll have some better data on how it compares to Boston pricing soon. But that is what we're seeing on the ground.
And it's a big part why we think the Cape's housing crisis is probably going to be around for a while. It's a difficult place to build more housing because the labor is not there. And to pull people in from off Cape, like Backyard ADUs, who's trying to be part of the on Cape community, it's you've got to have a reason beyond just running business there. And we're coming because we want to help out. It's like Booth Bay, Maine. It's like Bar Harbor, Maine. It's like Williamstown, Mass. These places that are just stuck. But there is a way out with the ADUs and a lot of the work, and the Cape, especially the Cape Cod mission, has done a really good job to help offset some of these headwinds, to create a path for ADUs to make a difference, especially with the people that already live there.
Yeah, and honestly, a lot of these ones where we come out and do feasibilities, it is possible, but sort of that ceiling we're running into is costs across the board. So we'll talk a bit about that more in a bit. So let's hop into permitting. That's a big one. So there's sort of two paths that towns are taking for ADUs. There's the by right permitted use. So you don't need to do any special permits. It's easier, it's faster. There's typically the rules are laid out and it is governed by the building department. So we're going through the building department, making sure it meets all oh my God. Wow. All the codes. It's been a long day for me. Meeting all the codes, not only of the town, but of state and local building codes, including electrical and plumbing. And like Chris mentioned, the Cape Cod Commission has done so much work to blaze that trail, because this by right pathway really makes this process a lot more streamlined, simple, and ultimately affordable. The towns that don't have that, there's still special permit requirements. So you still have to go through the building department when we're ready to build. But before you have permission, you typically have to do public hearings, whether they're with a planning board, a zoning board, or in the case of Falmouth, both. The timing is uncertain. You really need to do a lot of upfront planning and development, submit things, wait for hearings. There's appeal periods. So it does lengthen lead times. If you're at a public hearing, neighbors can make comments, all your abutters are notified, and that again can sort of lead to a bit of contention. It can delay that permitting process a bit. We've had a lot of experience doing special permits, and it's always sort of an unknown if it goes to that realm of how the neighborhood is going to respond and do they understand. And then how ultimately does that board respond to that? But as we've seen, like in Falmouth, it really is just a rubber stamping process. So all these rules are put in place. ADUs are allowed because there is such a need, but they still require to go through this special permitting process, check all the boxes, and appease all their rules. So across the board, Bourne and Yarmouth, all ADUs are special permits, but in other towns, if you're detached as opposed to attached to the primary structure, you may need a special permit. And like, I feel like we're hammering home Falmouth here. We've done several projects there now. That permitting takes a while. You have to do the planning permit and then the zoning permit. Each has time before and time after.
Yeah, I think you got to go to Falmouth 3 different times over the course of 5 months and stay in one of their cheap hotels that you could afford on the travel budget.
Yes. Yeah. And often those hearings were, dare I say it, not quite necessary, but
yes, they were very much rubber stamps. And I think that's the thing for everyone to take home. If you are in Bourne, Yarmouth, Falmouth, or Chatham, do not be nervous about the special permit. It just means it's going to take a while to get your process through. We haven't permitted in Yarmouth or Bourne. We've only permitted in Falmouth of those 4 yet. But I would suspect that a lot of those boards are positive towards ADUs. I think we've seen some news about Chatham and Bourne of them trying to make changes. So don't be scared. Don't be nervous of the boards. They're going to work with you for the most part. And it's only 1 in 5, 1 in 10 hearings where neighbors are unruly. So it's really nothing to stop you from trying to do this. You should stand up and try to get it done.
Absolutely. And it really sort of comes down to just conversation and educating. And, the town has it. It's in the rules. They are allowed. You just got to jump through these hoops.
Mhm.
All right. There's also bonus permitting. So on the Cape, there are so many overlay districts, no matter what town you live in. It's something you got to be cognizant of up front, because it does often drive certain changes or adaptations we'll need to make for that permitting process, whether it's early on with our survey work and due diligence, which we'll look at it a bit, or is it septic and bedroom count? But there's a lot to consider because we know the Cape is a sensitive environment. There are a lot of septic systems down there. There's a lot of wildlife, so there's many things to consider. So often, yeah, if you're near water or wetlands, estuaries or tributaries, there's bird migration corridors, wildlife corridors. I tried to upload here the overlay map of Falmouth. It wouldn't really fit well on a slide, but if you go take a look at that, it's incredible how many colors and lines are etching across Falmouth because there's so many different districts. One we've permitted in is the Coastal Ponds overlay. It's in a lot of the Falmouth area. That has specific rules about lot sizes and bedrooms. So we'll talk a bit more on septics in a bit. Here's just an example though. There's just so many overlay districts. You could live on the same road next to each other, but one house could be in one district and the other's not. You can be in multiple districts. So very similar to the special permit. It's not something to be intimidated by, but it's something to do your due diligence on up front, so you know what's possible and what adaptations you might need to make.
Yeah, and to figure this information out, so the reason that Falmouth is on here again, I don't know, I didn't realize how many Falmouth examples were in here. Falmouth has an online GIS tool. It's mapgo.io. But they have a tool, you can put your address in, it takes you right to the address, and then there's a bunch of check boxes on the side, and you can say, show me the coastal pond overlay, show me the bird migration overlay, and immediately find out which of these that you're in. Most of the other municipalities in the Cape do not have those tools. So the way to find out if you're in one of these overlays is to just call the town. You've got to call the town. You've got to get a planner on the phone or the building commissioner and ask them if you're in one of these overlays. That's the easiest way to do it. The towns that don't have these cool online search tools do have these maps available in PDF form, but they can take a very long time to sort through. So I would encourage you, just ask the building department, say, hey, I'm at this address. Can you tell me which overlays I have? And you can even ask them what that means. The building departments are usually very helpful, and they'll tell you that if you're within 75 feet of a stream, you're going to have to go through a whole bunch of permitting to get that through, and it's probably going to be something that even goes to the state level. Oh, and April just put that link in the chat as well, falmouthmass.mapgo.io. It's an excellent tool.
Yeah, and other towns are hopping on that GIS train. So if you do search your town in GIS maps, like I think Harwich has updated theirs, and they do have some of those overlays in there. Or also, yeah, Google your town and then zoning overlay map. Sometimes the zoning map isn't always the same as the overlay. So you'll want to make sure you look at both if you're looking at PDFs. Awesome. This is an example. If you are near certain wetlands, that house we looked at earlier in Falmouth was near a pond. So it required us to do a little bit of extra legwork up front in the survey phase. We had to delineate our wetlands. Where was the edge of the pond? Where did it go from wetlands to lawn? And then we had to make sure that our project, not only the house, but our other components were outside of any restricted areas. And then while we are under construction, we made sure there was no runoff into that pond. So we had to do a little extra work, do some wetland delineation, file all the right paperwork. Again, not something to be totally intimidated by, but just another extra step up front, which in this case, we caught at the feasibility study level. So we were able to give the homeowners a heads up to say, hey, this should be something on your radar. We'll probably have to do it. And then as we move forward in the design phase, we're able to get that done.
Hey, Tim, we've got a couple of questions from early on here that we could probably pause and bring in.
Yep.
So Tim from Sandwich put a couple in here, not specific to permitting, but and I think you've run across it. Sandwich only allows 1 bedroom with their ADUs, but it's up to 850 square feet.
Yeah, Sandwich has sort of 2 categories. An accessory apartment, which is by right, and that's a 1 bedroom, or an ADU, which can be, I believe, up to 2 bedrooms. To be totally honest, it's been a bit since I've read that bylaw, but I do remember they had these sort of 2 pathways. And then thinking about the permitting route, one is by right. If you have 1 bedroom, you can do it by right, assuming you meet all the other requirements. And then the other one, the ADU, can have more bedrooms, but you do need to have planning board approval. So it's not a zoning board public hearing, but it's through the planning board.
What about some of the design ideas? Because I remember we worked with one lady who had all kinds of neat ideas about how to stretch 1,000 square feet, but keep the bedroom count down by consolidating bedrooms. Do you want to talk to that at all?
Yeah, so there's some nuance there in the language of that maximum size, and how each town looks at that. So Falmouth, like we were talking about earlier, is talking the outside wall to the outside wall, and everything inside there is counted as square footage. In Sandwich, I believe, they are not counting, they're talking gross living area. I'll need to double check that, but they're not counting hallways or closets, or utility space in that square footage. So in this case, she was able to have a larger footprint of a house, but her living space, which again, excluded certain areas within that home, met that requirement.
Yeah, and she did an office laundry room combination to avoid a septic concern with an extra bedroom. There was a lot of unique things we did in there.
Yeah, and we'll touch on that a bit more here of how does that look? What is a bedroom? How does that look? Sort of from the septic Title V piece. Were there other questions in there? I hope that answers
the other one. I'm not Tim. You may Tim, the questioner asked if is there a per square foot charge on Cape Cod. I'm not entirely sure what it's referring to. Tim, do you know, or have you seen?
I assume, all right, I guess there's 2 ways. Maybe he's thinking the building permit cost per square foot. The other thing he could be asking is our pricing per square foot.
It's probably one of those 2.
Yeah, so we could touch, Tim, maybe you could clarify for us in the Q&A, or we'll sort of talk a bit at the end about pricing, but we're going to go over all these things: permitting, utilities, that all can impact cost. So yeah.
Yeah, pricing is all over the place on the Cape. We're hovering between 300 and 370 a square foot for sub, for under 700 square feet, roughly. And then we've heard stories of garages costing $250,000, $300,000 without any living space. So it's part of this island-like construction behavior. There's just prices all over the place, and it's very difficult to nail down what something could be done for. So it's a tough thing to put your finger on.
Yeah, I hope that helps answer your question, Tim. If it didn't, ping us again in the Q&A, and we'll help clarify. All right, so yeah, sort of what's the bare minimum for permitting? Is sort of after that feasibility step, we're rolling into design. We'll get our survey team involved. We're super lucky to have a great team that not only is doing survey work, but they're doing septic work. And each town is a little bit different in terms of what they want to see on that professional site plan. But we pull them in, we'll do the existing conditions and add, hey, what are we adding in terms of the ADU, other infrastructure items that the town wants to see? And a big part of that will be septic. So what is already on site, and what the tie-in might be, et cetera. I know this image is a little bit hard to see. We're going to zoom in and look at that in the septic section. So I'll talk a little bit more about it then. If there's any additional engineering that needs to happen, whether it's, civil or environmental, that gets pulled in. And then typically, most towns we've seen, they want to see what's existing there in terms of the house, and also specifically bedrooms. So we pull that in as well at that early stage. But this is an example of a finalized plan that all had to get done, had all the details needed, so we could take this and move through permitting.
All right. I might regret this, but we've had a lot of serious conversation this evening, and we decided we need to have a little commercial break. So tonight's commercial break is sponsored by Jim's Flood Ready ADUs. They're located in 10 Lowland Drive in Phippsburg, Maine, which is a great little hamlet just past Brunswick. Jim started Flood Ready ADUs after visiting Long Island during the Hurricane Katrina of 2005. He realized there would soon be a market for simple, no-nonsense ADUs that can float with incoming storm surges across New England. Today, Jim is the only purveyor of floating ADUs in New England and is ready to help Down Cape prepare for the next big one that may or may not ever come. Flood Ready ADUs are fully customizable. You can pick your rudder color, and they even come in Maybeck cedar shakes. To reach Jim, call him at 207 ADU Float or 207-268-3568. So thank you, Jim, for sponsoring tonight's ADU session on the Cape. And in case anyone was wondering, that was not a real business. Back to you, Tim.
All right, Chris, we'll see you at the local stand-up night. All right, so permitting's a big deal. Things to get through. But a big one is utilities. Not only to aid in permitting, make sure everything's right, but how are we going to get that ADU hooked up? In these three ways: water, sewer, and electrical. So let's dive in. So as many of you know, the Cape is mostly septic. Some towns have sewer and some towns are adding more sewer. And there is that larger conversation of expanding sewer and removing more nitrogen to help protect the delicate environment. We could have a whole webinar on that. So we're not going to get into the nitty gritty. We just want to sort of key in of the things that we're seeing on site and the important things that we highlight to help us cost out ADUs and make sure they can be permitted.
And I think the big thing to highlight on here, Tim, with the septic for like what we're looking like, what's going to be kind of a stopper in the process, or at least specify more uncertainty, is this age of the system in 1996. As some may know, 1996 is when Title V got passed, or I don't know if it's when it got passed, but it's a cutoff date for when old data gets to be used. And that's a signal of a little bit more work that has to go into figuring out a septic system.
Definitely. And if you depending on your circumstances, bought a house recently, you should have that Title V report. Or if your system was replaced or inspected, maybe you've had a Title V report done. The local health agent should have all the records. So if you don't know much about your septic system, you can email your local health department and get what records they have. And the keys there is basically, where is it? Are there any grade constraints? The big one there is, can things continue to be gravity fed, or might you need a pump? That just has some construction impacts and costs. What's the existing capacity? That's also really the key is, hey, how old is this infrastructure? But what is there? Is there any bedroom capacity? If we're adding a 1-bedroom ADU, can we tie into that system? Or, do we need to look at something else? And again, I can't get into all the details, but across the board, there's big concerns with nitrogen, and you may or may not need to look at a nitrogen reduction system, which has some big cost implications. Yeah, so that's most of the Cape. If you are in a region that has public sewer, we're also looking at grade for that pump issue, because it does sort of impact cost, $5 to $6 grand thereabouts. But what is the type and size of your line? Where is it in your yard? And then what are the local rules to connect to that pipe and add existing capacity? Cool. So this is that plan I said we're gonna look at earlier. We have both in our planning phase, what's going on. And then here's a live construction photo. So you'll see sort of on the bottom of the screen, our proposed ADU. This is a 1-bedroom ADU going onto a property that had a 4-bedroom septic system. Initially, this existing house had 4 bedrooms, but we did a bedroom conversion, which I'll talk about here in a bit. But we basically, for that ADU, had to connect to that existing system and use the existing tank and the existing leach field. Falmouth did require us in the end, per Title V, each town will interpret that slightly differently, to have its own tank for the ADU. So that's what we see in the photo here, is they are actually adding an entirely septic tank, separate tank on that septic that the ADU is running into, and then it is connecting in there to the existing septic tank. So again, 4 bedrooms is what the existing system was there for, and we ended up splitting it, 3 in the main house, 1 in the ADU. Yeah, any questions, Chris, as we're cruising through this?
No, I think that's a good example of what we're seeing most common, is that we are using the existing system and modifying it in some way rather than doing an entirely new system. And it's a huge difference in cost. So the addition of a new septic tank on this project, it ended up being the tank itself was a $3,500 or $4,000 line item in the budget. Whereas if we had to do an entirely new system, it would have been probably would have been a $14,000 to $20,000 line item. So a significant reduction in cost if you can find a way to reuse the system or find capacity in it.
And then the other thing we figured out at that planning stage was, if we wanted to go above the 4 bedrooms, go from 4 and add that ADU as 5, we would have had to add a nitrogen removal system, which would have been over $30,000. Awesome. So bedroom conversion, what is that? What are the nuts and bolts? Every town, it's determined by building code, and they may want to see something slightly different than others. So you do want to confirm with your local authorities what they want to see. But typically, and I'll go back to this plan here, the example here of a 4-bedroom house. This is a sister lives in the house with her husband, and then they're building the ADU for her sister in the backyard. So 2 people live in this house and 1 person is moving in here. So they had 4 bedrooms, 1 of which was used as an office, but on paper is a bedroom. It has a regular 3-foot doorway. And so to convert this bedroom, to say, hey, this is no longer a bedroom in a house, we're gonna remove this door, cut open the wall, change this 3-foot opening to a 4-foot opening. And then in this case, what the town wanted to see was also remove the doors from the closet in this room. And now what was a bedroom in the house now no longer has a door. You can't put a door on it because it's 4 feet. And that is now an office and not a bedroom. And that allowed us to add that 1-bedroom ADU in the backyard. So that was our way to avoid the nitrogen removal system that was over $30,000, and then go this route that, although it did cost some money, we had to, do the actual work here, the bedroom conversion, and then add that septic tank like you saw in the backyard. That was the way where we were able to properly permit and do the septic here.
So we've got more cost questions coming in, which I think we can answer, because I know cost is the key thing here, especially with the cost increase of the pandemic. So first question, what's the anticipated cost of a 1 or 2 bedroom Demona ADU on the Cape? So that's one of our 1.5-story design paths. It can be 800 to 1,200 square feet. But if we were going to do the 800 square foot one, I think it's going to fall somewhere $350 to $425, depending on finishes and what's going on in the backyard. And as a note on cost, we very much prefer quoting all-in build prices, because the cost per square foot varies so dramatically when you're talking about these small square foot prices. or these small homes. But generally speaking, the houses that we're building down there, they're coming in anywhere from 270,000 to 350,000 for the sweet spot's been 800 square feet. So there's a bit of a range there, and some of these utility things can be big swings. Next question from Kate. She's saying she saw one of our pamphlets saying that one way to save costs is to try to find cheaper cabinets, cheaper flooring, basically deal hunting. The question is, will Backyard install them if they do that? Tim, do you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so we've that would probably fall into our more DIY category. We're sort of in this umbrella of figuring out permits and utilities. Then in the actual design and construction, we really work with the homeowner of what is the overall budget and what do you want us to get done and what do you want to do? So if you're going out and, going to the restore and sourcing your own cabinets, finding your own, countertops. We have clients that, are pouring their own concrete countertops, finding their own tile, stuff like that. If you're taking on that scope, you'd probably install them. In that sense, you're doing all that inside work. We would figure out, hey, what's all the stuff we're going to install in the factory? But there is some nuance there in terms of what exactly the materials are, and then what we can install on site or what gets done in the factory, and then integrate deal hunting on those local materials.
Yeah, those DIY shelves are our way to essentially allow people to go out and do that deal hunting. But unfortunately, with all of those different materials, we get hung up in trying to figure out the nuances of them. And it gets expensive for us to keep track of how to install everything out there. So it ends up being cheaper. But if you find a local handyman who can help do that kind of stuff, after you save on construction management and our overhead coming out of it, you can get ahead pretty significantly and bring the costs down of building essentially your own house. But the goal of those shelves is to get you to a point where all of the super risky stuff from a budgetary standpoint and the build going wrong have been completed, so that the only risk that you have when you get to that point is time. How long does it take from getting a waterproof shell that looks almost done to actually getting an occupancy permit to move in?
Yeah, and like the cabinets is a good example. If they're not totally plumb when you put them in the first time, you may have to take them out and put them back in again, or modify them a bit if you got a really good deal. But as long as those are in, you got to get that will get your occupancy.
I just put a link to our DIY shell event to the recording of that if anyone's interested in more on the shells.
And then final question before we dive back in here, the average utility costs of these houses. How much does it cost to run one of these? So it's very affordable. We have focused quite a lot on making these very energy efficient. And we've done that by trying to find what we call the point of, it's basically a point where your returns on the extra layer of insulation or more efficient appliances don't have a good payback period. We've driven the cost of these down pretty significantly. I think we used to be able to very easily say they cost about $1,000 a year to run all in. But there's been a ton of fluctuation in utility rates in Massachusetts and Maine. So that has, like in Maine, it used to be $700 to run one of these things. In Williamstown, the Cape, it was $950 to $1,000, but I think rates have gone up. So I think a safe bet is like $1,100 to $1,300 per year for heating, for hot water, for lights, for appliances, just everything, because they are all electric and they're all with super efficient mini splits. And I think the interesting note about a small house in general, not just one of our small houses, but when you build a small home and you're careful about your square footage, you just make sure it's built tightly. The portion of the utility bill that is driven by heat drops pretty significantly. So when we look at our HERS modeling, which is the independent energy analysis, the cost to heat and cool the house is typically around 30% of the total cost, and the rest is made up by lights and appliances and hot water. So it's kind of it's not a way that you typically think about how to get the utility costs down, when you're thinking about a much larger home where you've got the natural gas bill, you've got the electric bill, you've got the propane bill, and they just run constantly. So I guess back to this, Tim, you want to talk about wells?
Yeah, I just want to jump off that a little bit. Is as we're going through that design phase, in Mass, we are doing that energy modeling. So we will get a projection of exactly what your house will cost. And that is required.
And they've been pretty close too.
Yeah.
We've done some retrospective analysis on what the house is actually using. The HERS modeling tends to be pretty accurate.
And what are you seeing at your house these days? Chris lives in a backyard ADU. What's your house?
Yep. We are in, we live in the first Dimona ever built. And we were the test case for it. So I would say that it's not quite as well insulated and not quite as airtight as what we're building today, because we experimented with some things. So for people that are familiar with some of the statistics, so our house was only air sealed to 3.2 ACH 50. In Massachusetts, we're shooting for less than 1.5 now. Just means my house is a little bit leakier. The roof in my house is also not insulated to R60. I'm only at R48. And those were basically challenges that we had in the factory trying to figure out how to make the half ceilings work. And to the question about somebody and the cost of the Dimona, the cost of the Dimona specifically is higher than our other models because of the insulation strategy that we need to do now in that vaulted ceiling on the second floor and some of the air sealing that needs to get done. It tends to be an expensive per square foot house for us to build. But cost of it, we don't have any utility bills because we're net zero. We did solar, and we have a 7 kilowatt solar array. And the first year that we had that, we had a 600 kilowatt surplus on our usage. If we didn't have that, I think our total annual bills would have been, it would have been like $800, $900 or something. But that was at the main
rates.
Main utility rates were only 15 cents a kilowatt at that point. They're now 30 cents a kilowatt. And I think on the Cape, they're 30 cents or higher. But it is extremely valuable to add solar to one of these because it is relatively simple to get them down to net zero. It costs about $22,000 to get these to net zero with solar in Maine, and about $27,500 to get them to net zero in and around Massachusetts. So there's a cost increase for solar in Massachusetts, unfortunately.
Great. All right, big tangent. Let's get back to it. So the utilities, we touched on the septic there a bit. Again, each sort of site is nuanced. The well is similar. So are you on town water, or do you have a well? Chris, this is a great photo you grabbed. This is from a feasibility that I did. I spent some time out in the yard trying to figure out where is the well. We ended up finding it. This one had some great information. Not all wells are created equal, so not all of them have this, but popping the cap off, I was able to get some good information here. And what we're really looking for when it comes to the well is, what is that refill rate? Because if we're going to be connecting a new unit, having new fixtures, kitchen, bathroom, hose spigots, etc., we just want to make sure, or hopefully, that well pump and the refill rate will be able to support that new ADU.
To clarify that, so the refill rate on these wells is how quickly can you drain this thing and will it fill back up with water? And that's the number that tells you, can your well actually support a household? So an average shower, if you're taking a shower, it's about 2.5 gallons per minute with that thing running. If you're running a tub, it's 7 gallons per minute. So if you think this well has a refill rate of 4.5 gallons per minute, you're going to start draining the volume of that well when you have 2 showers running. And you're actually going to have a very specific amount of water that's in this cylinder drilled into the ground before you hit the dirt, and you don't have any water left. So refill rates are all over the place. We've seen them as high as 45. Basically, you can't drain that well. I think, Tim, that was something you just looked at in Montague, a huge dug well. And we've seen them like this one, very low. This is not a good refill rate. This is a well where we advise the person to be careful and expect to maybe need to drill a new well after the ADU is completed, to be safe. And then the final thing I would add too, this is very unique to the Cape. So there are a lot of wells on the Cape. That part is not necessarily unique. Wells are unique to all rural areas. But for some reason on the Cape, and if anyone in the audience knows why this is, there's a lot of wells that are buried. You can't find them. And in everywhere else that we operate, the wells are a metal cylinder that comes out of the ground 12 to 18 inches, and you can see it very easily. And they have blue caps or green caps. But in the Cape, there's a lot of wells that are have PVC casing, not steel. And there's a lot of wells that are buried, and people have no idea where they are, and there's not a great way to find them. And as Tim said, in this specific case down in Truro, we found it because the homeowner was able to find a really good detailed as-built site plan for their house from 30 years ago or something.
It got us close. I was out there with the metal detector, and then our surveyor was able to actually nail it down, and it only ended up being like 6 inches underground, but
yeah, just enough. You can't see 6 inches deep, and if it's PVC, you can't find it with a metal detector. So
yeah.
I think I'll throw it out there to people on the call. I am truly interested in why this is. I think I've never asked our engineer, but if somebody wants to email us why the wells are buried on the Cape, we'll send them a free t-shirt. So little challenge out there. I want to know why this is. Why are we hunting for buried wells on the Cape? There's got to be a good reason for it.
Awesome. And then other towns are on town water, which case you do just have to pay fees to connect. And then each town is a little bit different about how much work they do at the road, and then getting it to the ADU. It's either on the builder's responsibility, or sometimes the town will do it as well. And then whether you need a new meter or you can connect to the existing house meter is also municipality dependent. So another thing to consider.
Well, that's a free t-shirt. Someone's got a free t-shirt already. I don't think it's the right answer, but it could be right. Talitha says it's a pirate legacy, digging for buried treasure. People on the Cape are just good at finding the wells, but we're going to send Talitha a t-shirt. So if anyone else wants one, come up with another good reason.
That's great. All right, so things we look at when we come into the basement, typically the basement or crawl space, or sometimes outside in a meter pit. We're looking for a couple different things. What is the actual material of that pipe, and how big is it? And then also at the meter, how big is that meter? So when we're looking here, let's look at our photos. We're going to want to see, hey, on the left here at the bottom, we see that blue pipe coming up. So that's a PEX pipe, and they measured it as 1 inch. It then reduces down to a 5/8 as it's going into the meter here. So these are just important things to see, because we want to know, again, sort of similar to the well, how much water are we able to connect? If we're going to connect to what's there, might we run into any water pressure issues? And we just want to make sure from the outset, exactly here, can you use it? So generally speaking, if you're 3/4 inch or bigger of copper and less than 100 feet away, but also, moral of the story, there's also town rules, and that may dictate what you can and cannot do. A good example is Falmouth. Man, we should have called this the Falmouth ADU session. They require a separate meter, separate connection to the street, and you can't mount it in a crawl space.
It didn't Barnstable as well, so it's not just Falmouth. I think it's. Correct me if I'm wrong.
We connected to the existing service there.
Okay, that was
Harwich allowed us to either connect to the existing house or go to the road. In that case, the homeowner wanted to have that second meter, second account, and have their own bill, so they chose to go to the road. yeah, and then that's a good point. So with that new service to the road, you're getting brand new infrastructure, so there's no concerns. Although when we were doing that due diligence in Harwich, if we had connected to the existing house, they were going to need to upgrade the pipe from the house to the road, because it was old and because it was galvanized. They ended up doing that upgrade anyways, because it was a good long-term investment for their house and making sure they had the right equipment and no problems down the road. So that's why we do this at this stage, and why looking at the utilities is so important, because it will have cost implications, but there's also that practical element to make sure that it's going to serve the ADU. All right, the electric, generally speaking, and down on the Cape, it is not with the town. So if you're on town water, you're dealing with the town. If you have a septic, you're going through the health department and Title V with the town, but the electric company is its own separate thing, and also is a big pain in our side. But generally what we're doing is we're going to take a new 200 amp service for our ADU. When we're doing these all electric units, especially with electric hot water heating, we want to make sure there's enough load there so that there's never any issues. So how that looks, whether it's underground or overhead, we'll be looking to bring that to that ADU site. So again, each one is unique. If you do have big draw items like a pool or a hot tub, or in the existing house, that instant hot water heater, we'll want to make sure that you have enough at the house and then our ADU has enough. So often how we're doing that is this second service where the ADU is not at all attached to the main house. We're going directly to that infrastructure at the street. You'll also have a second account, and a second meter, so it'll be separate bills as well, which is nice. And then don't forget the communications conduits. So that way as well, whoever your service provider is will run those lines, and you can stream all the Netflix you need or join Backyard ADU webinars. So it looks different sort of everywhere. Underground services, what we're typically looking for is, where is that nearest transformer? Distance is huge because there's different size wires bringing different amounts of power. And that wire is not cheap. It is expensive. So in this case, that transformer runs to a box. In that box, that power is getting distributed to various places. And then we're looking at seeing what makes the most sense. Where can we get that 200 amps of power? Can we connect to this box? Can we connect to the transformer? Or is there already existing conduit that we can run an additional service line through? In this case, as we see here, the meter isn't mounted on the house. It's mounted near the road. And sorry, I just had to sneeze. And that's a 2-inch conduit. Chris, do you want to tell us a little bit more about this?
Yeah, and so Tim made the comment in the last slide, this is a huge pain in our side. So this is a unique thing on the Cape. And we know why on the Cape all the power is underground, because it's windy and they're thinking ahead. They don't want to keep putting power lines back up. We honestly wish it happened more. But it makes the getting power to an ADU a lot more complicated than everywhere else in New England. And the reason being is that there's a lot more variables involved. So we've got, whereas we get situations where the meter is not in the house, and then we have multiple underground runs that we have to evaluate and multiple sets of wires we got to find. Conduit size, so there is minimum conduit sizes for different wire thicknesses. So the one you're looking at is a 2-inch conduit that can only take 100 amp wire. So we could not upgrade this service in that conduit to a 200 amp line. We would have to dig this whole thing back up, put new conduit in the ground, and run new wire. Whereas if we were overhead, you could just run a new wire overhead and string it from the poles. It's very, very easy and straightforward. The other big thing that makes this complicated, when you're doing underground power, the nearest public spot that you can connect to could be really far away. So when you're underground, you're looking for these green transformer boxes. Whereas when you have electrical poles, you can, for the most part, connect to any electrical pole, and you can even connect between the electrical poles sometimes. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. These transformer boxes are typically 400 feet apart, and 400 feet of 200 amp wire. 200 amp wire to run that far is about $20 a foot, before you account for the conduit to put it inside and the labor to put it in. So it's a multi-tiered problem. The first bit is trying to figure out what you can do from an electrical code standpoint. How much power can you push through a wire through a certain distance? You get some math involved there, and generally you need to get an electrician involved. You've got to figure out, if you can't get power from this box in your front yard, this one that's concrete, you got to figure out the distance from that to the transformer, and whether or not you have to dig up the ground between that and all the way to the transformer. And then Tim mentioned the other thing that makes this complicated is you got to do it with Eversource. And it can take a long time to get an engineer out there. So it's a difficult process. But as with everything, it's not a showstopper. The worst situation that we've seen with power, it was a really bad situation. Actually, it was expensive. I think it added $16,000 to the project, and we had to upgrade power all the way from the green transformer box to the house, and it was 350 feet away. But it ended up being, with an average cost, about a 10% price bump. But taxes are probably lower. Maybe electric rates would be higher if Eversource had to put poles back up every time it got windy. So all in all, there's ways around it, but this is going to be a stumbling block when you're starting to plan your project if you have underground power. So I would get ahead of it in the planning process and get that plan, because it could be something where you have a completely finished house and then you wait for 4 more months to get power to the house.
Yeah, so we want to do this due diligence up front.
Yeah.
And then those of you that do have overhead power on the Cape, there's different rules with Eversource as well, of, Chris alluded to it, how those wires can run. So sometimes we'll continue overhead, or from a pole go underground. So a lot of different options. All right. So we've done septic, we've done sewer, and now we've done electrical. Chris, take it away.
That's it. So final commercial break, and this one is sponsored by us, Backyard ADUs. So we want to tell you when it's time to schedule a feasibility study. And of course, a feasibility study is us telling you all the things we just talked about your property, for a one-time fee of $600. So some of the things that will tell you that you're ready is your Instagram feed starts to show you how multiple ways to plant a window seat. There's more ways to do it than one. You wouldn't believe it. Or your 13-year-old daughter is referencing last week's Property Brothers project, even though it was in Toronto. This Old House is on your up next list on Netflix. I still watch This Old House, but I'm guessing if it's on your Netflix, it means you're thinking about building an ADU. Or Backyard ADUs ads are stalking you on the internet. That's probably a good sign you've been looking at and considering a feasibility. And finally, not least, your mother-in-law put her house on the market and said she's looking forward to being close to her granddaughter without a housing plan. I would suggest jumping on an ADU quick, or you're going to be living under the same roof a little bit closer than you might expect. So in all seriousness, the feasibility study is something that we've been working on for almost 4.5 years. The first 200 feasibility studies done was me basically going to people's houses for free, learning this stuff as we went, and spitballing ideas with our head of operations, or now head of operations, Austin, who's a structural engineer. But the goal of this feasibility study is to help you through all this stuff in a formal way and give you actual paper that says, this is what you're probably going to need to do for your power. This is probably what you're going to need to do for your sewer. This is probably what's going to happen with your water. This is how big you can build. Basically all of the things. Put it on paper. You have that, you've spent $600 like a home inspection, and then you can go off and do whatever you want. You don't build it, you're out $600, or you can use that to shop prices with other people. You won't have to have 6 electricians come over and tell you, oh, I think you can do it with a 100 amp service. And the next guy says, oh, I think you can do it 200 amp service. You're going to have the piece of paper that's right. So that's the commercial break, the sales pitch of the whole night. We want to help you do this, and we want to do these feasibilities so we can get more of these built on the Cape, whether it's us or really a builder down there.
We also have our feasibility study event next Thursday at 6 o'clock, September 21st. If you are interested in a feasibility study and have more questions specific to that, you can either reach out to Tim, which I'll put his email there in the chat, or attend the event next Thursday too.
I think that event might be more pictures of cobwebs in basements, trying to find water meters, moving giant piles of stuff that are hiding people's sewer services. So we're going to get more into the weeds on the utilities on that one than so some of the unique stuff that's happening on the Cape.
And I'm looking forward to your stand-up bits on the next one as well.
I don't know. I think I'm retired.
Yeah. But and so
other questions too before?
Any other questions we can answer?
I think the key here too, while we're waiting for those questions to trickle in, is like Chris said, doing hundreds of these and now being on the ground, building in these towns, going through planning, zoning, building, electrical inspections, plumbing inspections. You see a lot. And pictured here, this is our team on the ground, our carpenters, our engineer, and our project manager. So we've sort of been through the ringer and learned a lot along the way, and we're really happy to share that with everyone. So whether you're gonna say, hey, I'm ready to dive and take the feasibility, or still have more questions, please reach out to me. I'm always happy to help. Take a quick zoning review of your property and help point you in the right way, whether that's to town officials or financing, or provide our own expertise. So Avery will put my email in the chat.
Yeah, I threw that in there. And we did have another question.
Great.
Is there any extra charge on your end for transporting houses over bridges?
It's a great question. Yeah, so our freight costs are higher coming to the Cape. Again, sort of looking at that island pricing, we don't have to put it on a barge and pay for that barge, but transportation to the Cape is more expensive. Whether you're doing a normal with road load or an extra oversized load, there are increased costs that we're seeing for that.
Yeah, it's about $3,000 to pull big long boxes over the bridge and have them state troopered anywhere down there. So it's a big number. $3,000 is a lot of money, but in the overall scheme of the project, it's not a huge number. The electric is a bigger number. The septic is a much bigger number. But the follow-up question: do all-in costs include freight? Yes, they do. Any number that we ever quote is going to be an all-in cost. We don't think it's helpful to tell you what individual aspects cost unless you're doing a DIY shell and you're trying to budget a DIY shell. Then we're going to tell you what every little thing costs us. So you know what you should pay an electrician to do the electrical scope, because you shouldn't pay more than we do if you're going to pay him directly. So it's all super transparent, and we want to share that pricing data that we've collected to help you get it done.
And that's our goal with that feasibility, is to get our eyes on all these things we sort of looked at today, permitting, utilities in your site, to know and be able to give you sort of an accurate price of what it's going to take all in on your lot. So,
all right,
awesome. Well, I know we run a bit here past 7. We always appreciate people tuning in, spending their evening with us here. So, any last question?
There's an event too, hopefully coming soon.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we're working on an event. We'll keep you posted. It'll probably be late October, November. We're hoping to get people together live and in person, show you what we've been working on and answer your questions, and probably drink a few beers.
All right. Well, have a great night, everybody. We look forward to meeting some of you in person.
Thank you all for coming.